Before we start, hit that subscribe to support the channel and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. What I'm about to tell you will challenge everything you think you know about World War II, about Antarctica, and about secrets that governments have kept buried for nearly 80 years. My name is Dr. Sarah Chen, and for the past 15 years I've worked as a classified documents analyst for the Department of Defense. 3 months ago, I was diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer. The doctors gave me 6 months, maybe 8 if I'm lucky. That timeline changed everything for me, because when you're facing death, keeping secrets for people who will outlive you starts to feel less important than telling the truth. I've spent my career reading documents that officially don't exist, analyzing files that would never see daylight, processing information that could rewrite history textbooks if it ever became public. Most of it was routine intelligence work, the kind of bureaucratic secrets that protect operations but don't fundamentally challenge our understanding of the world. But 6 months ago, I was assigned to a special project reviewing Nazi expedition records from the 1930s and 1940s. What I found in those files has kept me awake every night since. In 1938, Nazi Germany launched something called the German Antarctic Expedition. The official story, the one you'll find in history books, says it was a scientific mission to map uncharted territory and establish whaling stations. The expedition was led by Captain Alfred Richer, and they supposedly spent a few months taking aerial photographs and claiming land for the Reich. Standard colonial expansion stuff. Nothing too unusual for the time period, and certainly nothing that would warrant the level of classification I encountered. But that official story is a lie. A carefully constructed cover story designed to hide something far more significant and far more disturbing than anyone could have imagined. The files I reviewed came from a vault that required 3 separate security clearances just to access. Documents marked with classification levels I'd never seen before, stamps indicating they'd been sealed by direct presidential order in 1947. These weren't just sensitive military records. These were files that someone very high up the chain of command wanted to ensure would never see daylight. The first document that caught my attention was a debriefing report from a U.S. Navy intelligence officer named Commander James Morrison. In February 1947, Morrison was part of Operation High Jump, the massive U.S. Antarctic expedition led by Admiral Richard Byrd. The official mission was to establish research bases and test equipment in polar conditions. But Morrison's classified report tells a very different story about what they actually found down there. According to Morrison's account, 3 weeks into the expedition, reconnaissance flights detected unusual geometric structures beneath the ice in an area the Germans had previously explored. These weren't natural formations. Radar indicated large, angular constructions that appeared to be artificial, possibly buildings or installations of significant size. When Admiral Byrd ordered closer investigation, what they discovered defied explanation. The structures were accessible through a series of natural ice caves that had been modified and expanded. Someone had created an entrance system leading to what Morrison described as an underground facility of enormous proportions. The construction was clearly German, with Nazi insignia and German text visible throughout. But the scale was unlike anything they'd expected. This wasn't a small research station or temporary military outpost. This was a permanent installation designed to house hundreds, possibly thousands of people. Morrison's report includes detailed floor plans sketched during the initial reconnaissance. Multiple levels descending deep into the ice and rock beneath Antarctica's surface. Living quarters, workshops, laboratories, storage facilities, and something Morrison identified as manufacturing areas. The infrastructure suggested this facility had been operational for years, not months. Someone had invested enormous resources into creating a self-sustaining underground city in one of the most hostile environments on Earth. But what disturbed Morrison most wasn't the size of the installation, or even the fact that the Nazis had successfully hidden it from the world. It was what they found evidence of in the lower levels. Equipment and research materials indicating the facility had been used for experiments that Morrison could only describe as beyond conventional science. His report mentions strange devices that appeared to generate energy without any visible power source. materials that didn't correspond to any known elements, and laboratory spaces configured for research into what he termed unconventional physics. The most chilling part of Morrison's account describes finding living quarters that appeared to have been recently occupied. Personal belongings, food supplies, equipment that was still warm to the touch. Someone had been there within hours or days of the American discovery. But when search teams explored the entire accessible portion of the facility, they found no inhabitants. Whoever had been operating this installation had vanished without a trace. Admiral Byrd immediately ordered the facility sealed and classified all information about its existence. But Morrison's report indicates that sealing it wasn't as simple as just posting guards and walking away. The installation extended far deeper than their initial exploration had revealed, with sections that remained inaccessible due to what Morrison described as active defensive measures. Someone or something was still protecting parts of the facility from intrusion. The second document that shattered my understanding was a translated German report dated April 1945, just weeks before Germany's surrender. The document was written by SS Oberfuhrer Hans Kammler, the man responsible for Nazi Germany's most advanced weapons programs. Kammler's report was addressed directly to Heinrich Himmler and describes the successful completion of what he calls Project Ultima Thule. According to Kammler's report, the Antarctic facility wasn't just a hiding place or research station. It was the culmination of years of work developing what he termed revolutionary propulsion technology, based on principles that conventional physics couldn't explain. The report describes successful test flights of aircraft using this technology, vehicles that could achieve speeds and maneuverability far beyond anything conventional engines could produce. But Kammler's report goes further. He describes the Antarctic facility as fully operational and completely self-sufficient, capable of supporting a population indefinitely without any external supplies. More disturbing, he indicates that key personnel and critical research materials had already been transferred to the facility, along with what he calls selected genetic specimens for future development. The final paragraph of Kammler's report contains language that still gives me chills. He writes that regardless of the outcome of the war in Europe, the work would continue in the southern sanctuary. That the Reich's most important mission wasn't conquest of territory, but development of capabilities that would ensure their ideology's ultimate triumph, regardless of temporary setbacks. Hans Kammler disappeared in May 1945 and was never found by Allied forces. His fate remained one of the great unsolved mysteries of World War II. But based on what I found in these files, I don't think it's a mystery at all. I think Kammler made it to Antarctica, along with other key Nazi scientists and officials who supposedly died or vanished in the final days of the war. The third document that changed everything was a CIA intelligence assessment from 1952, 7 years after the war ended. The report documents multiple incidents of unidentified aircraft displaying flight characteristics that exceeded anything in the American or Soviet arsenals. These sightings occurred in remote areas across South America, Africa, and the Pacific, but all shared common features that matched descriptions from Kammler's research notes. The aircraft displayed no visible propulsion systems, achieved impossible acceleration rates, and demonstrated the ability to hover silently before departing at tremendous speeds. Most significantly, several sightings were tracked by radar as they headed toward Antarctica before disappearing from detection. The CIA report concludes with a recommendation for immediate investigation of Antarctic activities, but that recommendation was apparently ignored or suppressed. The file contains a handwritten note in the margin stating that further investigation was deemed too politically sensitive and that the matter should be compartmentalized indefinitely. What I found in those classified files wasn't just evidence of a hidden Nazi installation. It was proof that some of Germany's most dangerous minds had escaped justice and continued their work in secret for years after the war supposedly ended. They'd built something in Antarctica that challenged our understanding of physics and technology. And based on the pattern of incidents documented through the 1950s, they hadn't simply vanished into the ice. They'd been actively operating, testing their technology, and possibly expanding their capabilities while the world assumed they were gone forever. But the files contained something even more disturbing than evidence of Nazi survival. There were reports of contact attempts, diplomatic overtures that suggested these weren't just scattered fugitives hiding in the ice. They were organized, structured, and apparently confident enough in their position to reach out to world governments. In 1954, a State Department memo documented what it called an irregular communication received through Swiss diplomatic channels. The message claimed to represent the Antarctic Research Collective and offered to share advanced propulsion technology in exchange for official recognition and territorial sovereignty. The communication included technical specifications that State Department scientists confirmed were beyond current American capabilities. The memo indicates this wasn't an isolated incident. Similar communications had been received by British, French, and Soviet governments. Each message demonstrated knowledge of classified military projects and technological capabilities that should have been impossible for any outside group to possess. Someone in Antarctica was monitoring global military development and had access to intelligence that rivaled or exceeded what major world powers had gathered about each other. What terrified government officials wasn't just that these communications existed, but that they demonstrated capabilities no nation could match. The technical specifications included in these messages described propulsion systems that violated known laws of physics, energy generation methods that produced impossible output levels, and materials science advances that were decades ahead of anything Allied scientists had achieved. The response from world governments was swift and coordinated. A secret agreement was reached between the United States, Soviet Union, and major European powers to never acknowledge these communications and to suppress any evidence of their existence. The Antarctic Treaty of 1959, which officially banned military activities in Antarctica, wasn't really about environmental protection or scientific cooperation. It was about containing something that all major powers feared but none wanted to confront directly. I found evidence of at least 3 military expeditions launched covertly to investigate the Antarctic installations between 1955 and 1962. None of these missions appear in any official military records, and based on the scattered reports I could piece together, none of them were particularly successful. The few surviving documents describe equipment failures, unexplained communication breakdowns, and personnel losses that couldn't be adequately explained. One report from a 1958 British expedition describes encountering defensive measures of unknown origin that disabled their vehicles and communication equipment without any visible attack. The expedition was forced to retreat after losing contact with 3 team members who were investigating what appeared to be an entrance to underground facilities. Those team members were never recovered. By the 1960s, it appears that world governments had essentially given up on direct confrontation and settled into an uneasy, unofficial truce. The Antarctic presence would be ignored as long as it remained contained to the polar region and didn't directly threaten global stability. But the files suggest this arrangement came with ongoing monitoring and intelligence gathering that continues to this day. The most recent document in the collection I reviewed was dated 2019, indicating that whatever exists in Antarctica is still considered an active concern requiring classified oversight. This wasn't ancient history buried in dusty archives. This was an ongoing situation that current government officials are actively managing and deliberately keeping from public knowledge. What shook me most wasn't just the evidence that Nazis had escaped to Antarctica and built something extraordinary. It was the realization that for nearly 80 years, every major government has known about this and chosen to maintain the cover-up rather than reveal the truth to their own citizens. The technological implications alone should have revolutionized human civilization. If the capabilities described in these files are real, we're talking about energy sources that could end dependence on fossil fuels, propulsion systems that could revolutionize space exploration, and materials science advances that could transform manufacturing and construction. But instead of pursuing this knowledge for the benefit of humanity, world leaders chose to pretend it doesn't exist. I started to understand why the classification levels on these files were so extreme. This wasn't just about protecting national security or preventing panic. This was about maintaining the fundamental power structures that govern our world. If this technology became public knowledge, It would destabilize everything from global energy markets to military balances that have shaped international relations for decades. But there was another layer to the cover-up that became clear as I worked through more files. The Nazi installation in Antarctica wasn't just a historical curiosity or even a technological treasure trove. Based on intelligence reports from the 1970s and 1980s, it appeared to be growing, expanding, and developing capabilities that were becoming increasingly difficult for world governments to monitor or contain. Satellite imagery analysis from 1983 shows heat signatures indicating massive underground activity in areas where no official installations existed. Power consumption patterns suggested industrial operations on a scale that dwarfed anything civilian populations could support in polar conditions. Most concerning, atmospheric monitoring detected chemical signatures that didn't match any known industrial processes. The files contained evidence of recruitment efforts, communications intercepted by intelligence agencies indicating that the Antarctic Group was actively seeking specialists in advanced physics, genetic research, and aerospace engineering. Job offers extended through intermediaries to scientists working on classified government projects, offering resources and research freedom that no official institution could match. Several prominent scientists who disappeared under mysterious circumstances in the 1980s and 1990s had been contacted by these recruitment efforts shortly before vanishing. Dr. Marcus Webb, a propulsion specialist who worked on classified Air Force projects, received a detailed offer in 1987 describing research opportunities that seemed impossible given known technology. 3 weeks later, Webb disappeared from his home in Colorado Springs and was never found. The pattern repeated across multiple countries and scientific disciplines. Brilliant minds working on humanity's most advanced projects were being systematically recruited by an organization that could offer them resources and capabilities their own governments couldn't provide. Each disappearance represented not just a loss of talent, but a transfer of classified knowledge to an entity that remained completely outside official oversight. By the 1990s, intelligence assessments indicated that the Antarctic installation had evolved far beyond its original Nazi origins. Whatever existed down there had become something entirely new, a technological civilization that operated according to principles and capabilities that challenged everything we thought we knew about what was possible on Earth. The most recent files I reviewed contained intelligence, suggesting that this hidden civilization wasn't content to remain isolated indefinitely. Intercepted communications indicated plans for what they called graduated revelation, a systematic process of introducing their technology and capabilities to surface populations in ways that would minimize disruption while maximizing their influence over future development. These weren't the desperate schemes of aging Nazi fugitives hiding in the ice. These were the calculated plans of a technologically advanced society that had spent decades developing capabilities far beyond anything surface governments possessed. They weren't hiding anymore because they were afraid. They were waiting because they were preparing for something much larger than simple survival. The final document in the collection was a threat assessment prepared by a joint intelligence committee in 2018. The conclusion was stark and terrifying. The Antarctic installation had developed into what analysts described as a parallel technological civilization, with capabilities that could fundamentally alter the balance of power on Earth. And based on intercepted communications and observed activities, they were preparing to end their self-imposed isolation within the next decade. Reading these files changed everything I thought I knew about our world, about our history, and about our future. For nearly 80 years, while humanity struggled with energy crises, environmental challenges, and technological limitations, there had been a hidden civilization in Antarctica that possessed solutions to all these problems. But they weren't sharing those solutions out of altruism or concern for human welfare. They were developing them as tools for something much more ambitious and much more dangerous. As I sit here writing this, knowing my time is limited, I can't help but wonder what will happen when that hidden civilization finally decides to reveal itself. Will they offer their technology as a gift to humanity, or will they use it to reshape the world according to their own vision? Based on everything I've read, based on the pattern of secrecy and manipulation that stretches back to 1945, I don't think we're going to like the answer to that question. But there's something even more disturbing in these files that I haven't told you about yet. Something that makes the technological implications seem almost secondary compared to the real purpose behind everything they've been building down there. In 2003, a joint CIA and NSA operation managed to intercept a series of encrypted transmissions originating from the Antarctic installation. It took cryptographers nearly 2 years to break the encryption, and what they found inside those messages revealed the true scope of what we're dealing with. These weren't just communications between scientists or engineers discussing research projects. They were operational briefings for something called the Integration Protocol. The Integration Protocol documents describe a systematic plan to influence global development through strategic technology releases, economic manipulation, and what they termed cognitive preparation of surface populations. This wasn't random advancement or accidental progress. For decades, key technological breakthroughs that shaped our modern world had been guided, influenced, or directly provided by the Antarctic civilization. The development of transistor technology in the 1940s, the sudden leap in computer processing power during the 1960s, breakthroughs in satellite communication systems, advances in medical imaging technology, even the foundational research that led to the Internet. All of these developments included components or insights that originated from the Antarctic installation, carefully introduced through intermediaries and front organizations to avoid detection. But they weren't sharing this technology out of benevolence. Each release was calculated to advance surface civilization along specific developmental pathways while maintaining their technological advantage. They were essentially shepherding human progress, guiding our species toward capabilities they needed us to possess for reasons that became clear in later intercepted communications. The Integration Protocol outlined 3 phases of contact. Phase 1 involved covert technology transfer to accelerate surface development while remaining hidden. Phase 2 called for limited direct contact with select government officials and scientific leaders to establish formal but secret relationships. Phase 3, scheduled to begin sometime in the late 2020s, involved open revelation and the establishment of what they called collaborative governance structures. What terrified intelligence analysts wasn't the technology sharing or even the manipulation of human development. It was the language used to describe Phase 3 objectives. The Antarctic civilization didn't view themselves as liberators or benefactors offering assistance to struggling surface populations. They saw themselves as supervisors preparing to assume direct management of what they considered an immature but useful species. I found transcripts of intercepted communications that referred to surface humans using terms typically reserved for livestock or laboratory specimens. We were described as the breeding population, genetic resources, and cognitive assets requiring optimization. The clinical detachment in these communications suggested they viewed humanity not as equals to be helped, but as property to be managed more efficiently. The files contained evidence that Phase 2 had already begun. Starting in the early 2000s, high-ranking officials in multiple governments had been contacted directly by representatives of the Antarctic installation. These contacts offered access to advanced technologies in exchange for policy changes that would facilitate eventual integration under their oversight. Climate change legislation that seemed strangely advanced compared to available scientific data. International agreements that appeared to prioritize technological development over economic considerations. Military procurement decisions that favored research into specific types of propulsion and energy systems. All of these policy directions had been subtly influenced by information provided through these covert diplomatic channels. The most disturbing revelation was that some government officials hadn't just accepted these arrangements. They'd actively collaborated in concealing them from their own populations. Cabinet-level officials in at least 6 countries had received detailed briefings about the Antarctic civilization and agreed to support their long-term integration plans in exchange for access to technologies that would give their nations strategic advantages. These weren't rogue officials acting independently. These were systematic agreements at the highest levels of government. Arrangements that effectively sold humanity's future autonomy in exchange for temporary technological superiority. The files contained copies of formal treaties signed by presidents and prime ministers, acknowledging the Antarctic civilization's authority and agreeing to facilitate their eventual emergence as Earth's dominant governing force. But what made these agreements even more chilling was the timeline they established. According to the treaties I reviewed, Phase 3 implementation was scheduled to accelerate significantly starting in 2025. The surface population would be gradually introduced to the reality of the Antarctic civilization through carefully managed revelation events, beginning with controlled scientific announcements and building toward formal diplomatic recognition. The process was designed to take approximately 5 years, culminating in 2030 with the establishment of what the treaties called integrated administrative structures. By that date, the Antarctic civilization would emerge from secrecy and assume direct management of global governance, with existing government officials serving as regional administrators under their oversight. The files indicated this timeline wasn't arbitrary. Intelligence assessments suggested the Antarctic civilization had concluded that surface humanity was approaching critical technological and environmental thresholds that required direct intervention to prevent catastrophic outcomes. They weren't revealing themselves because they wanted to help us. They were revealing themselves because they decided we could no longer be trusted to manage our own development without supervision. Climate change, nuclear proliferation, artificial intelligence development, genetic engineering capabilities, all of these represented potential threats to what they considered their investment in human civilization. Rather than risk losing their carefully cultivated resource, they decided to assume direct control before we could damage ourselves beyond repair or usefulness. The medical research being conducted at the installation involved genetic analysis of surface populations gathered through various covert collection methods over decades. They'd been systematically studying human genetic diversity, mapping optimal breeding combinations, and developing what they called enhancement protocols, designed to improve the utility of future generations. These weren't abstract research projects or theoretical studies. The files contained evidence of active genetic modification programs, small-scale trials conducted on isolated populations to test various enhancement techniques, remote communities that experienced unusual health improvements or cognitive advances, medical breakthroughs that seemed too remarkable for the resources available, genetic mutations that appeared beneficial rather than harmful. All of these anomalies could be traced back to discrete interventions by the Antarctic civilization, testing their enhancement protocols on unwitting human subjects to refine their techniques before broader implementation. We weren't just being studied. We were being experimented on, modified and optimized according to their specifications for whatever role they intended us to serve in their vision of Earth's future. The scope of their surveillance capabilities was beyond anything I'd imagined possible. Satellite networks that monitored global communications, atmospheric sensors that tracked population movements, genetic sampling systems embedded in routine medical procedures, data collection operations that harvested information from every connected device on the planet. I'm dying anyway, so they can come for me if they want. But the truth is out there now, and truth has a way of surviving even when the people who tell it don't. Everything changes in the next 5 years. Watch for the signs, question the sudden breakthroughs, and remember that when they finally reveal themselves, they're not coming as saviors. They're coming as owners.